Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Zombie Train. This is episode 231, and I'm your host, Ellis, otherwise known as Train Man. This week, we're working on some stuff in Olive, a little bit of a departure, less blocks, more other stuff, but if you want to hear more about that, go watch Under Construction, that just came out at the same time. So, anyways, this week, by the way, 2 weeks until a route review, just want to point that out. I don't have a route to review right now. If you have a route you want me to review, contact me at bombs321 on Skype or send me an email at ellistrain@gmail.com. I'm more likely to respond on Skype. Anyways. I got another question about California, and there was more stories that I can tell from that. So in episode 211, that was called Going to California, and I went over when I went to California the first time. And now I have the second time, and I can fill in some gaps as well. So, Spring Marionette asks, have you ever head to California? If so, whatever happened there? Also, thank you for picking my comment. I think he's referring to the episode that this was posted on, which was 205 Tornado Alley. Anyways. So, he asks if I've been to California, and the answer is yes, and I went over that in that episode. That's episode 211, like I said. And when I was there, I met for the second time with, I believe it's Vice Admiral is a 4-star Admiral, or just regular Admiral. I don't know the actual name, but his name is Bill Gortney, or Will Gortney. And when the Great Panic happened, he had just recently been promoted to a 4-star Admiral, and he was operating as the U.S. Fleet Forces Command at that time. And he was the one that got a lot of people out of Dodge, and he was also one of the major players in the Battle of Yonkers, and he held the Navy side of it. So he wasn't really part of the battle itself. He did a lot of the coordination and a lot of the logistics for the battle, and including getting me involved. So he was someone that I was familiar with, and he was familiar with me, and he was the one that basically gave the citywide okay when we arrived in San Francisco the first time before the Battle of Portland, to sort of get the base off of high alert, because we did roll up in 4449, and the only way we got in was basically saying to the guards, you can get on here, you can point guns at our heads, if we do anything amiss, feel free to shoot us, because they wouldn't trust us otherwise, and we just had to get in to relay that message. I knew as soon as we got in, and I was able to get in touch with this Admiral, he would okay me, and he did, so that was good enough. And Weibald actually struck a chord with this guy and ended up doing work for him because he was the de facto commander of everything at that point. And so, it stands to reason then when later on the Zombie Train, which was a couple of years later, if I can pull up the timeline, and the timeline that I have is not very detailed, and it's not exactly the most accurate, but it does exist. There it is. So a couple of years later, I believe, we were sort of minding our own business, and I get a sort of proposal, I guess the word would be, from him saying, hey, you should, or, it was a couple of years later, so we were, it was at the end of that year, actually, and we'd been doing a lot of work back at home, back in Rhode Island on the East Coast. Weibald had been doing missions, keeping himself busy, etc. And I hadn't seen him or heard from him in a while. And we were getting kind of concerned. And so we hear from them, Admiral Gortney, that they want us to do something for them. And this was, we didn't know it at this point, but this was the beginning of the Zombie Train Incorporated. And it was in exchange for all of their help, or, all of their help was kind of a bonus. In exchange for all of our help with what the Zombie Train Incorporated was for, which was getting the economy running again and connecting all these towns and communities that were otherwise not protected yet, not safe. We would have basically anything that we could ask for, so with a big asterisk. But the kicker was a large dirigible. This is about the size of the USS Akron, or USS Macon, so I don't remember the stats off the top of my head, so I have to look it up very briefly. This was a big airship. It is a big airship. It sort of works as our flagship. It's a 785-foot-long airship. And so they basically said, listen, we can build this thing for you. Or they were in the process of building it already, because the D Corps was doing extremely well. The D Corps is the dirigible corps. And the thing is, with an airship, airships are basically ideal for World War Z, and obviously nobody had access to them. But because you can stay aloft for great periods of time, you can go great distances during those periods of time, so that you can find somewhere safe. They're almost silent if you're doing it right, and you need to be silent. You can just go with the wind. And they won't get stopped by zombies ever. The problem is landing one, or at least mooring one, for any significant period of time. And that usually requires specialized facilities, but there are ways around that, and that's kind of what we had to do. We had to improvise with this airship when we got it. But they came around. They sailed all the way through the Panama Canal, which that was a problem in and of itself. I think I've briefly mentioned it before. But they sailed through the canal, up, back to Rhode Island, to Quonset Point, which was our headquarters. And they basically unloaded this proposal on me, and he came himself, which is how I knew that this was a big deal, and there wasn't as much as we were letting on, and we are in the midst of building this airship. It's almost done. It's going to be the biggest in our fleet, and it was originally going to go to the Dirigible Corps as their sort of number one, as their flagship. But if you help us with this, we can give you this as sort of a repayment, a beginning of repayment, and you can use it however you want. The problem is it's filled with helium, and helium is tough to come by. So it didn't immediately become a liability, but it was far less useful than one would hope. But so I agree to this, and we pile the train crew onto, or the train crew, not the whole train crew, but anyone who wanted to come, onto this ship, which was, I think it may have even been the Carrier Enterprise, which was funny in and of itself. The thing was kicking, and it was the flagship, even though it was basically destined to be retired, and that didn't happen because of World War Z, and they wanted their hands on every single nuclear ship they could possibly use, and the Enterprise was at the top of the list. So, the Bucket of Bolts took us back to San Francisco. It's funny, speaking of the Enterprise, because she got decommissioned at the, 3 weeks before the Great Panic. They began to decommission her, and then the Great Panic hit, and, I forgot his name already. I keep getting distracted. Gortney. I almost called him Gorham. Gortney realized the importance of nuclear vessels because of the fuel problem, and they brought her back out. And she immediately became the flagship, mostly because she needed a lot of work, and so they just piled all the people on her in order to make sure there were always people to fix stuff. It's a very, very maintenance-heavy ship. So, I'm losing my train of thought here. So we sailed back around we sailed back around, pulled into San Francisco. Obviously, the news had gotten ahead of us. There was a little bit of fanfare. And we arrived at... What is the name of it? I'm losing track of it. Where is it? I'm looking around San Francisco on a map, and I'm trying to remember where... There it is. There's the airfield. Where's Hangar 1? It sticks out. It's not exactly small. But we arrived at Hangar 1, which is a just stupendously enormous dirigible hangar. And there are very few of that size still left. And they bring us in there, and there's this half-sheathed skeleton of a dirigible, and there were people all over it. There are people absolutely all over it. And there are people all over us, too, because they're asking us 10,000 questions, because now they know who we are, and they're a little bit excited. So, yeah, it was very, very different than the last time we were there, that's for sure. And I'm answering questions, we're working on looking over, trying to think about, like, the terms of what were going on, and then I realized, hey, where's Wybold? And they don't give me a straight answer, and I'm getting concerned at this point. I'm like, where's Wybold? What happened to him? Where did he go? And they're like, well, we don't know. We sent him on a mission to sort of get rid of the last little section of the Band of Guardians because they've been going around and raising hell. And basically my response is, excuse me, what? Like, there's any sort of semblance of organization with them still? And I was completely bewildered, because I hadn't heard that before. I didn't realize that at all, actually. And then they break the news to me that they haven't been heard from in a while. And I go, how long is a while? And they go, well, about 4 or 5 months, maybe 6. And that's when everything stops, and I go, okay, we're gonna get this thing finished, and the first thing we're going to do is look for Wybold. And they're like, alright, it'll be done in, I think it was like a couple of weeks. They were working like madmen on this airship. And so they work faster, and it's done in, it was honestly a number of days. It was even tough to call it a couple of weeks, because it blew by, because I was just signing paperwork, I was making deals, I was, trying to figure out everything, doing logistics, making about 1,000 calls, quote unquote. They're not really, it wasn't like a phone call, but 1,000 messages home a day, back to Quonset to figure stuff out. And then finally it's okay, the ship's ready to fly. We're gonna do some test runs, maiden voyage stuff, go around, see if everything works, and I'm like, everything should work, right? And yeah, everything should be fine. I go, we're going to find him right now. And so we piled into the thing, and they started to argue with me, and I was like, they started arguing with me, and my response was, well, it's mine, isn't it? It's, this is my airship, right? You guys gave this to me. I'm like, oh, yeah, I mean, we did. It's, okay, then I'm telling you what to do. We're going to find him right now. And that's exactly what we did. We flew out there, we flew out to the Midwest, and it was a very short stint, all things considered, in San Francisco. Which, it wasn't an extended stay. It was much longer than the last one, but it was definitely not an extended stay, and I did not go back there often, even though when Enterprise needed to be serviced, that was one of the only places that could service it, that could service her. There were a couple of other large hangars that are scattered around. There it is. I totally just lost it. It's at the Moffett Field. That's right. So Moffett Field, it's toward the south end of the bay. Hangar 1. You can look it up. And it's one of the world's largest indoor spaces. So that was one of the only places that could hold it, but we started building mooring masts wherever we could. we actually did attempt, and this was on my craziness, and thankfully with modern day computing and things like that, we did manage to get a very rough tie-on at a distance to the mooring mast on the Empire State Building, because we were doing a little survey of New York City, but it's not like we were using it for its intended purpose. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next week. Trainman out.